Anna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Santos, thank you for being here today. The Census Bureau is charged with a constitutional mandate that impacts every single American, ensuring fair representation in Congress and census results that allocate critical resources across our states. Unfortunately, the 2020 census, as has been highlighted before, revealed significant flaws in its execution, with miscounts that unfairly shifted congressional representation and distorted the allocation of electoral college votes. States like Texas and Florida were undercounted, while states like New York and Rhode Island were overcounted. The discrepancy disproportionately harmed Republican-leaning states, as Ms. Green talked about, while benefiting Democrat-leaning ones. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a 2022 Heritage Foundation report that highlights the multiple miscounts of the 2020 census.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. According to this report, the 2020 census miscounting errors had far-reaching consequences, distorting congressional representation, reallocating electoral votes, and misdirecting over $1.5 trillion over 10 years in federal funding. These resources were unequally distributed, with overcounted states benefiting at the expense of the undercounted ones. Director, I want to ask you, in the 2020 post-enumeration survey, identified significant overcounts in states like New York and undercounts in states like Texas. What specific factors contributed to these discrepancies?
If you take a look at some of the data, there tended to be higher concentrations of Latinos and African Americans in some of the states that were undercounted.
Were these errors more pronounced compared to previous censuses, and why?
If you go back enough censuses, they were relatively comparable. There are always some states that are, well, there typically are states that were overcounted or undercounted.
You know, according to the Heritage Foundation report that I talked about earlier, it highlighted that $1.5 trillion in federal funds could be misapplied because of these miscounts. How is the Census Bureau addressing these financial consequences? Well,
what we're actually doing is trying to make sure that folks understand that vehicles like the post-enumeration survey and the demographic analysis, and as well as the actual decennial censuses are basically glimpses at what the perfect truth is. So even the post-enumeration study that we conducted was subject to the same challenges, perhaps even more so than occurred in the 2020 census. The PES, while it estimated, and we stand by the overcount and undercounts, it is a glimpse of what occurred. There are natural error bands around that. So we don't know what the truth is. If you assume the PES is the absolute truth, then yes, you know, those conclusions can be made. But the reality is it could be anywhere within those margins of error.
Well, you would agree with me that the miscounts impacted ccongressional apportionment across the states?
They can relative to the truth, but no one ever knows what the truth is.
Well I think this is kind of the role of the Census Bureau, quite frankly. But it would, and it did have an impact on what states got however many seats. Is that correct? From the 2020 census?
Yes, the 2020 census determines congressional apportionment.
Okay. And the miscounts had a direct impact on some states not getting a seat and other states retaining a seat that they otherwise would not have?
Yes.
Okay. How does the Census Bureau plan to prevent these errors from 2020 in the census of 2030?
Yes, we basically are taking an approach that we need to identify the populations and communities that contributed most to these challenges of counting everybody once, only once, and in the right place, and are doing specific testing and developing methodologies and leveraging technology and administrative data and such, so that we can go into those communities and get better counts through better participation. That a lot of that involves the recognition of trust issues in local communities, and so we are actively engaging in a continuous contact and engagement with local communities, with elected officials, et cetera, which is why we have been very active since 2022 and even before in terms of doing that type of outreach, talking to communities, getting to understand their concerns, and then working with them towards 2030.
Thank you. Does the Bureau acknowledge that including non-citizens in apportionment unfairly dilutes representation for U.S. citizens?
We simply provide the numbers, Congressman, and that's the best answer I can give to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see that my time has expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes Ms. Tlaib, and I apologize for skipping. Who am I supposed to? It says, I'm ahead. It says Tlaib here. Now get a, if I pick, let me think. Tlaib.